Philippians 2:5, and you've got to Romans 12:2.
So Philippians 2:5 says, "Let this mind be in you, which is also in Christ Jesus." And Romans 12:2 says, "And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God."
So, back to page 49, I guess when we talk about lose your mind to love your spouse, and we talk about the transformation, maybe we left out those two very important key parts about what's our scriptural basis for that, Philippians 2:5 and Romans 12:2, and there's literally a transformation. Some other questions that we got during lunch that I want to just come back and clear up. So what do we mean when we talk about being unbroken? And how our marriage is broken? And some people reminded me, and this is why I love the interaction so much, because it helps me remember stuff that I wanted to say. So, hey guys, actually, based on my parents' marriage, or based on marriages I've seen, we've got a pretty good marriage. Okay, but now the things I want to remind you about, the things we want to remind you about, the goal in comparison is not our marriage, or your friend's marriage, or the neighbors across the street, or your parents' marriage. So no matter how good you may think your marriage actually is, the model is, what example does Christ and the church kind of mirror? Okay, so let's look at that. I am completely selfless. That's how Jesus was. That he gave up his own life. Okay, now here's the thing. Most men are willing, hey, there's a burglar. I'm willing to put myself in harm's way. Well, that's the easy part. But the harder part is dying to yourself every single day. See, that's a little harder. So as a matter of fact, with our men's group, we have a group that meets on Saturday mornings called Iron Men, and we talk about the idea that the man is priest, prophet, provider, and protector. And so when we break those things down, it's not just providing, bringing home money. That's a given. Should be. It's not just, hey, there's a burglar at the door, but it's providing all the other things that your wife needs. And we're going to talk more about that later in responsibilities. So we spent the morning laying the foundation, right? And here's something else that came up during the break, and I appreciate somebody saying this to me. Here's what we're trying to do is we impart biblical wisdom. All wisdom obviously comes from God. That's different from knowledge. So here's what we're trying to do. Here are the biblical principles. Jim, I went over that scripture 100 times. Yeah. But let's talk about how to apply it. So what we try to do is kind of lay the foundation. We know many of you understand the word. You're comfortable with the word. But now it's one thing to read it. It's another thing to go away from having read it and actually apply. Does that make sense? So
let's just look at how do we do that, Jim?
Okay.
How do we apply that?
So what do you got the answer?
Yes, I do.
Okay, go.
Well, the answer is always it takes tools, and it also takes Jesus Christ to showing you day by day how to live. That's pretty much it.
So hopefully everybody has got the mind transformation, and you've got Christ living in you and sticking out. Okay, now we're going to move to some practical tools to help you apply. Now that you have been transformed, now that your mind's been changed, now you've taken the mind of Christ, because now even being saved, even being Christ-like, we also battle with our sinful nature. So we're going to need some equipping tools, if that makes sense.
And I use tools until the Holy Spirit takes over in that particular area.
When you're working with it, like in the counseling room?
Right. And then hopefully as you have those tools will become closer and closer to what God has said, or how love comes in there is what I'm trying to say. So I say I use tools until the Holy Spirit comes in and takes over that particular area, if that's not too out there. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Well, explain it again. I'm not sure if I did.
You use tools.
You give
tools are good.
Tools.
Yes.
But ultimately what they...
And so when I say tools are, let's say they are kind of legalistic, or they are, you do step 1, step 2, step 3. Now, once the Holy Spirit invades that particular problem you're dealing with, it's going to be almost it's real. It's a lifestyle. That's what I do because of who God has created me to be. Does that make sense?
Well, let me tell you what I think I hear you saying. Okay, so as I'm learning and growing, of course, we're always constantly learning and growing, but in the early stages, I've got to be very intentional, okay, to not react. My wife said this to me, I lash out. So in the early stages, I've got to be very intentional. But as I become less and less like me and more like Christ, that response should become more reflex-like. In other words, I should be growing to where I don't have to pause. Okay, Jim. Okay, you start out, counting to 1,000. It's like you count to 500. It's like you count to 100. So as I grow, I should maybe have to count to 10. Or as I continue to grow, I don't have to count it all because it's just, how you heard people say, if it's in you, it's going to come out of you. So back to the process of sanctification, as I grow, it's less and less of that in me. Now, until we get to glorification, we're going to always struggle.
Exactly.
But hopefully we're going to be struggling less and less every day with our natural self.
That's right. I hope we got that.
So as we transition into great expectations in fairy tale marriages, and we've actually identified a young couple that we're going to bring up later on. This setup, by the way, is how our counseling room actually looks. So there's 2 chairs, and then there's this love seat. And so what happens when we're in the counseling room with a couple, and again, normally it's Teresa by herself, unless it's an intensive, when the both of us, it's like, and of course, it's spaced a little bit different. We're, looking at each other. But we're going to actually invite a young couple up to interact with us as we talk about this. But let me kind of set the stage a little bit. I'm not sure I've seen anything that potentially can cause more frustration than expectations. And here's the funny thing about expectations. I don't even know what you're expecting. You expect me to know you expect me to know what you're expecting. Okay, that's kind of a recipe for a disaster. So we got married. Teresa was like, hey, the grass needs cutting. Well, hey, call the guy to come cut the grass. You remember? Hey,
yes.
Hey, the car needs washing.
That's right.
Hey, go to Red. Why are you telling me this? Go to Red.
My father made sure my mother's car was clean for Sunday morning. And I expected that. And the yard was done as well. Everything was centered around that Sunday morning, everything looking nice.
So, hey, this 2010, whatever it was, it ain't like we got to get out there with the bucket like I grew up with. Why don't you go to the car wash and let somebody wash the car? Or I don't do yard work. I hate doing yard work. I hate it. So did I mention I don't like it? Hey, let's get somebody to come and do, But her expectations were, you know what I'm saying? But this was never, as much as we tried to be intentional and talk about, this was never discussed. So I didn't know her daddy always did all that.
Right, and my father could also fix things.
Oh, now this is funny, yeah.
He doesn't do that.
Yeah.
He doesn't fix things. I'm the fixer.
That's right. Teresa's the mechanic. I'll tell you guys a funny story. This is a true story. So, kids are so interesting. So I'm out in the garage one day. Elizabeth's probably 4, 5, or 6, and I'm trying to fix something. And, kids watch you, right? So she doesn't try and be funny, but she's asked this question. Daddy, it looks like you're having trouble. Why don't we go get Mommy? She literally just said, you don't the one fixing stuff. So yeah, but expectations can really kind of mess up a marriage. And then we're going to talk about the fairy tales that many of us have been told about marriage. And these things can set you up for failure if you're not careful. So at this point, Marcus and Jabrina, thank you guys so much for agreeing to participate.
And they're newly married.
Okay, now guys, listen to me. Drove over from Shreveport. Is that right, Marcus?
Yes, sir.
Drove from Shreveport. Matter of fact, where is there? Is anybody got what is that, 3 hours? Does anybody come further than that? I know we had a group from Memphis that had called, but I don't see them. So,
Oh, no, y'all from here.
Okay, so yeah, but drove over from Shreveport. Now, actually, I've not met Marcus before. I don't think we have met before, have we?
No, sir.
Okay, pleasure to meet you. Now, I know Jabrina's parents, and actually the Spans, Damon and Jennifer, did their premarital. And so we don't mean to put you on the spot. We're just going to kind of have a dialogue so it's a little something different from us just talking all the time. You know, I always find it funny when we ask questions because we didn't lay out any ground rules. Normally in a session we'd have ground rules. Okay, here's how you want to ask your questions. So I noticed when the wife gets the mic, the husband's going like, what's she going to say? You know, we didn't talk about you talking on the mic. So we don't want to put you guys on the spot. So what were there some expectations you had? Now this is tricky because they've already been through the training, so we should have got some. We don't want you to give the train answers. Were there expectations you guys had going into a marriage? And you guys got to share the mic so everybody can hear you.
Okay. I expected help. I expected effort. I expect help. I expect effort. And my background in my life has always involved, hard work and effort, and my goals and aspirations are going to require a lot of work and effort. And what I have expected and what I try to communicate is that I expect someone that's going to help us move forward towards some pretty big things.
Okay. Now, Jabrina, how does that compare to what you were expecting?
Well, I expected those same things, and I think that's something that we both knew when we were dating, because we kind of talked about that as far as goals and things like that in our background, and as well as our parents' marriages. Both of our parents are still married, and when we went through the training, we did. When we went through the book that we got, there was a specific chapter about expectations, and it went from, who's going to wash the car, who's going to make up the bed, and things like that. So we did have a very open dialogue about very specific things.
Okay.
But I don't think either one of us had unrealistic expectations going in.
Perfect. And here's a kind of, as an aside, one of the statistics that we share in the book, speaking of premarital counseling, do you guys know that the average couple spends $25,200 on the wedding, not including the honeymoon? And the average couple spends about 250 hours planning the wedding. On the flip side, the average couple spends less than $100 and less than 2 hours on the marriage. So this young couple did go through the premarital training, which, and I get it, like, older folks, we didn't even know that existed. So we didn't do that. But now our desire is that will become more of the norm than the exception, more of the rule than the exception. Okay, so those are kind of some of the expectation differences. What about some of the marriage or fairy tale that you heard about marriage that you've already seen maybe debunked? Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Okay.
I've heard people say that in 20 years, 30 years of marriage, they've never had one argument. And
People from Earth say that?
they were on Earth when they said it. I don't know where they're from. I've found that to be debunked.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I think that when you have two people, no two people are the same, and there's going to be some, a conflict here or there. Some may have more than others, but, to say that you've never had an argument, that's definitely not our experience. Even when we were dating, that's not your experience, so I don't know why, anyone would expect that during the marriage. So that was definitely debunked for us.
And the thing is, just nodding your head and agreeing to keep from arguing, that doesn't count.
Right.
So some people are like, we never had an argument because my wife, I don't argue. My wife starts arguing, I just be quiet. That's just creating a bigger problem. So
That's right.
that's not the same thing.
Yeah, I was going to say that as well. Usually they sweep it under the rug, and then it just blows up later, and maybe in 35 years, and then you think, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore.
Right.
I'm seeing that quite often.
Speaking about the differences in men and women, and speaking about unmet expectations, so here's something that we say often. Hey, some things are just understood. I shouldn't have to verbalize that. Okay, now, but guys, you often are giving people too much credit, maybe. I mean, I found that very little is actually understood. Mrs. Gavan mentioned this earlier, which is a great point. For the most part, God always works with opposites. As a matter of fact, you could even argue this. In order to become one, if you both were the same, you couldn't become one. Think about an extension cord. Think about an electrical outlet. You got a female end and a male end. They fit perfectly together. But if you got those two same ends, they would be useless. So the thing about opposites in a marriage is a good thing as we use those differences to help us to grow. So when we hear people talking about, I don't have to verbalize things, Teresa doesn't have my experiences.
Exactly. What about responsibilities in the home? Did you all, in your home, has anything been debunked, or what were your assumptions?
As far as, just like household thing. Okay, well, as I, said before, we kind of use our parents as examples, and they have two different ways of doing things, our sets of parents. But like with my parents, my dad does the yard work and things like that and cleans the cars, and my mom cleans the inside and things like that. But Marcus, I don't think he necessarily, that's not just like a cut and dry thing for us. I may do some things on the outside and he may do some things on the inside and kind of, even it out. So that was something that was, different for us as far as, using our parents as an example, I think.
One that I've been just very excited about, and I'm glad I have the opportunity to talk about this one, is when we were talking about our responsibilities, Jabrina said that she expected that she was going to always make up the bed because she just expected that I was never going to do it. And I said that I expected that whoever got up last would be the person and made up the bed. But in the 2 months that we've been married, what I've discovered is when I make up the bed, it gets made up. And when I don't make up the bed, I get back and it's still unmade.
What about and you guys have been married for
2 months.
2 months, really? I thought it was long. Wow, that is new. That is pretty new. Okay, let's talk a little bit, and we talk about this in the book on page 39, especially with your age and length of time being married. Cultural influencers. I think most of what we see on TV, most of what we see in the culture are the exact opposite of what we should be doing. Mm-hmm. So what are some, speaking to a younger group, what are some things that you guys have to deal with in terms of maybe it's among your friends or other outside influences?
And we were just talking about this at lunch. I believe negativity is one thing. For example, Marcus has a boss that, always has kind of a negative jokes to make about marriage and things like that. So you have people like that, and I think. I'll use another example. I was living with my in-laws when I moved to Shreveport before we got married because I had a job opportunity and I took it and they were sweet enough to let me stay there. And when people found out about that, they were like, oh, you're going to live with your in-laws? And oh, that's awkward. But it actually wasn't because we have a really good relationship. And I think that that kind of plays into the negativity too. So that's one thing that we've kind of had to deal with when it comes to outsiders, when it comes to marriage, just generally.
And we have some mutual friends who like to travel, and on a few occasions, people have said, let's go on this trip, but this isn't a couple's trip, so don't. Don't just assume that everything is going to be, a coupley environment. We don't want you and your marriage to make us uncomfortable. So there really is a lot of negativity out there towards marriage.
Would you tell them, everybody, where you would ask her for her hand. Just a sidebar.
Where? Oh, we were in South Africa. We were on Table Mountain in Cape Town, South Africa.
I thought that was wonderful. I thought everybody needed to know that.
Thank you.
Okay, that was just a sidebar. Let's keep going.
Okay. So the thing is, culture, I mean, this is the thing, like you mentioned, in terms of sharing that, that's so interesting because people do make so many negative comments about being married, about the institution of marriage. And so what I want us in this room to agree to do is to take a stand for that. And like I mentioned, this morning, I mean, hey, don't be afraid to say, hey, I don't think that's funny. And I know that's a little uncomfortable with it being the boss, Jeremy, our middle son, had one of his coaches who is divorced actually counsel him against marriage. And I understand a bad experience can mess your situation up, but don't get down on the whole institution because of your experience. And so, this again, we're not including parenting, but this is why it's so important as we're communicating. Okay, because there's so many outside indicators. Okay, Jeremy, let's kind of bring this back home and let's talk about what we believe, and more importantly, what the Bible teaches. And you've got to kind of be able to mute that, kind of be able to mute that from time to time. Teresa? What about the personality differences? Have you guys, did you already know, because you guys are probably way ahead of when we got married, but did you realize that men and women were this different?
I think so. I can say I think so because just based off of my parents, they are two different people, but they complement each other,
Right.
as personality-wise. So I knew that going in that, I knew when we were dating, there were differences, but we definitely complement each other. And I think you're kind of growing towards each other with those differences, I think.
I'm continuing to learn that we're different.
That's funny. That's funny. Yeah, it's revealing. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, wow. I'm 30 years in. I have to be constantly reminded,
Right.
Because I'm like, wow, we're just really different. Mm-hmm. We're just really different. Okay. Hey, guys, I will say this. I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing. I mean, if this is the future of where we're going, the future of marriage is looking bright. I mean, this young couple. So, anything else you guys want to add?
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you guys so much. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, this is really encouraging. It looks like the Spans didn't do a real bad job.
Did a great job.
Okay, so, some things that people, some expectations that people bring into marriage, and Marcus and Jarena touched on a couple of them. Hey, we're not going to argue. I never saw my parents argue. We're going to always feel in love. And when we talk about love, it's actually a verb. It's an action word. So when we talk about that whole emotional, fuzzy feeling, that kind of comes and goes. But the whole commitment about that stays. So those are some things that we often see people. We will share a set of common friends. We will basically make each other happy. These are the different kind of things that I see that people enter a relationship with.
Right. I was just going to say, when those expectations are unmet, how do we deal with them? And if you're through with that, I'll go on to that.
Go.
Okay. What do you all do, I guess, when those expectations are not met? And usually, I'm just going to say, I see where people are just kind of down and out, or because it's like he's not going to ever do that. And I'm thinking, well, he might not ever do that. So let's see, how are you going to respond to that? How are you going to stay angry all your life? You're going to be mad, or you're going to be unhappy for the rest of your life? Or are you going to do something different? Forgive and love and keep going with it. If it's not something, once again, that's a detrimental type thing, a very destructive type thing. You want to communicate. Matter of fact, like Jimmy said earlier, you sometimes think, okay, he should know what I want. Well, I'm going to tell you guys, men just don't think like we think. As far as when they don't think like we think, and that's how God designed them. That's not it's not by accident. They just don't think like we think, and that's okay. But communicate in a loving way. You can't do it in front of if the playoffs are on. You don't do that when LeBron's is shooting and all of that. Don't do that.
Now, this
at
is
that
what's
time.
so funny that I was just going to bring. This is what's so funny about Teresa making that reference. Teresa is kind of sports clueless, and so these are the kind
okay,
of questions. That's okay, but these are the kind of questions. Speaking about expectations, so I don't watch all of everything, although sometimes she argues that I do. But this is how she is. So let's say it's the national championship college football game right now. She's got the Super Bowl down because we make such a big deal of that. But outside of the Super Bowl, let's say it's a national college, it's the final game because this is the first year of the playoff. So she asks stuff like this: "Oh, is there a game on again today?" Excuse me. Why have I got Now she's grown a little bit. She wouldn't ask this, but maybe the other night you even said, and I don't particularly like the NBA that much. I watch it like around this time, but she will walk in. Let's say it's Game 7. Oh, is the basketball on again? Well, yeah, it's game.
I don't know the frequency. I don't know how many games it takes. I got it. I mean, I'll find out. Maybe one day it'll be interesting enough for me to get that information.
Now, what I do attempt to do, and I think this is a great thing to maybe model, is this is why, in terms of her saying you got to, when you pose your questions, because this is what I typically try to do. Hey, if she says this, and a lot of men are nervous to hear this, hey, Jim, we need to talk. But that, I mean, when she says that, typically, let's turn the TV off. Let's shut everything else down that we're doing so we can talk. Because that's communicated to me, this is about something really important that we need to talk about.
Exactly.
So now, but again, in terms of us being different, we don't always need to talk at the fourth quarter of Game 7.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? Well, I always need to talk then. I mean, so
that's why I was saying, women or men, it might be something that the lady likes. I don't know what that would be as far as sports, but I'm sure there's some sports people out there, or ladies out there. I was saying, choose the time that you want to communicate, and you can be intentional about doing that as it relates to what your expectations are. And like I say, just don't assume that he knows and stay angry at him. And he, bless his heart, and Jimmy used to get this all the time, and that's just the truth. He would come in and I would just be angry with him. I mean, bless his heart, he didn't even know what went wrong that day or what, but it was like, he should know this is what I want, or he should have done this, or he should have done that. But really he didn't. He wasn't with me on it. So, I would encourage you to be intentional, to communicate exactly what you need from him. And don't be afraid. That's another thing. A lot of people will not share their expectations because they think, well, that might not sound a certain way, or that's being too vulnerable. But I want to encourage you, this is your husband. You should be vulnerable with him. You have sex with him. You should be able to speak to him and tell him anything. And he should be accepting of it, or however, so he can talk to you about it. But you also have to make sure each of you have made that person comfortable enough to do that.
Here's the thing about marriage. Most of us have relationships where we keep people at arm's length, and most of us are being really, really careful not to be hurt too much with people. I know, speaking about baggage, I suspect that I was adopted when I was 2 weeks old. I don't know my biological parents. Just the way I grew up, I suspect there's a lot of internal baggage I have about letting people get too close.
He does.
Because you've analyzed it, over the years you've told me this. But now here's the thing. Here's the thing. In this relationship, you've got to be willing to expose yourself to be, if necessary, to be hurt over and over and over again. see, we can't afford right here. I'm not going to let Teresa get inside. I'm not going to let Teresa get too close. Although that's my natural, remember we talked about the natural man, that's my natural predisposition to operate like that. But in this relationship, you know, now hopefully I'm growing to act that way with others, but certainly here at home, you know, we need to be completely, you know, we did a show, I Can See You Naked, a show of relational transparency. And I don't know that since the fall in the garden, when Adam and Eve realized, like, oh, we're naked. And there's more to that than just being physically nude, by the way. But since that time, we have trouble opening up and allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. But I'm telling you guys, in these relationships, this relationship, in your marriage, you've got to work to where you are comfortable being vulnerable, if that makes sense.
And like I say, that you have to grow to that, I think. It doesn't come immediately, but little by little, it should be getting there.
So some of the fairy tales that we've already debunked is the whole idea, the whole adage that you may have heard before. Marriage is a 50-50 proposition. We've already spoken to that's not true. You know, it's not about keeping score. It's about me giving 100%, as Mrs. Gavan said, not expecting anything in return. I
was going to keep going with the unmet.
Okay.
I got a couple of more of those.
Go ahead.
All right. If there is something that you all are not going to come to grips with, you're going to have to change your perspective on it. You know, if there is an expectation of something that you desire and it's just not going to happen, maybe it needs to be change your perspective until you can get it there. Does that make sense? Instead of continually thinking about it, worrying about it, whatever, maybe you need to change your mind about it a little bit.
Okay.
Is that okay?
What's the second one?
And just like I said, don't throw that expectation away. Even if you have to change your perspective about it, maybe it's coming later, or it takes time to get there. That's it.
Okay. So under the idea of fairy tales, you know, we talked about the 50-50 part. We talked about we see this so much. We actually, at one point, we were counseling 3 couples premarital, and all 3 were living together. And so we see this a lot about, hey, it's a good idea. Why not try this on before we buy it? You know, so we hear people, but actually studies and statistics will show you that that's not true. And here's what I believe that happens. I believe in that cohabitation stage, since there's a lack of a commitment and you can come and go kind of as you please, I think, you know, psychologically that kind of carries over into marriage. And it's still that you're married, but you still haven't made the adjustment to the commitment. So that's something we see a lot in today's world. I mean, again, at one point now, obviously, we're counseling from a biblical perspective. 3 different couples come to see us. They know this, and actually, you remember this? All 3 of those couples happen to be cohabitating. So
And they knew it was wrong.
Yeah, well, I forgot one of them.
Well, one of them.
I forget. Anyway,
we won't go there. But yes, they knew they knew it was wrong, and that we are seeing that. We are seeing Christian people, Christian couples in church, Christian people in church. They know they are doing wrong, and they are settling in doing this. They know exactly what God says, and that I kind of relay. I'm like, okay, so you are somewhat in your face, God, because I know better, but I'm going to choose to do this. And some people they'll say something like, it's financially better for us to do it this way until we get married. I'm saying get married and you can have the wedding later, because you don't need to live together and cause that. There's a thing that you're doing that's causing it's sinful.
Okay.
That we sure you're doing. It's going to be very hard to live together and not have the sexual act if you're that close together. So that's just true, bottom line. So we are encouraging people too. If that's what you want, this big wedding, and it's a financial stress or strain, you can go to Justice of Peace. Go ahead and get under the marriage joined or to your pastor. And then you can have the big, fantastic wedding at the afterwards, and you can be, you can do that.
Another thing we see is a lot of couples are like, I'm going to try this marriage thing on for size. And we're not going to talk about this section of the book, but just to allude to it a little bit, marriage is more of a covenant. Actually, marriage is a covenant, not a contract. a contract. Now, where's the brief? Now, I'm not an attorney, but Mike, so I may be stepping out, but a contract is more of a bilateral agreement. It's kind of an if-then thing. If you do this, I'll do this. Whereas a covenant is more of a unilateral, I'm going to do this no matter what you do or don't do. So in the story we tell in the book we're not going to talk about the whole chapter of covenant versus contract, but one of my favorite stories to tell is the Hernando Cortez story. I love this story because to me it sums up. So Hernando Cortez is traveling across the ocean to invade this group of people. It's longer than they think, it's harder than they think, and the crew is getting really disgruntled with the whole trip. So they dock and they start disembarking and headed up the side of the mountain, and they look back and all the ships are on fire. And the men are panicking. What? Our ship's on fire. And Cortez stops them. No, wait a minute. This is not an accident. I set the boats on fire. What? Yeah. See, there ain't no going back. Unless we defeat this group of people, take over their country, and build our own ships, we ain't going back home. And so that's kind of how it is with marriage. There is no contingency plan. There is no plan B. This is going to work. And so back to what Teresa and I, now the key is this. This is something that we told this story once in an intensive with a couple. And literally this young lady asked a question which led us to go back and write a whole different chapter in the book. This is what she said. She said, I hear what you're saying about the commitment. And my parents were committed. She said, but let me ask you a question. And she didn't phrase it like this exactly, but this is what she asked. How do you remain committed to the covenant and not be miserable in the marriage? We're like, wow, that's a great question. So she said, I hear what you're saying. Stay out of duty, Jim. Stay. But man, this is miserable. And that's going to be hard for me to do. So how can I stay, but glad I'm staying? And we actually came back and wrote a whole different addition to the chapter, how to remain committed to the covenant and not be miserable in the marriage. And again, there are a number of tools. It's in the book. We're not going to go through here, but the whole thing we're talking about are fairy tales that people say, I'm just going to stay married as long as I feel in love. I'm just going to stay married as long as this is working. But this is a covenant you're making, and we go into great detail about the difference in the covenant and the contract. It's not a contractual arrangement that somebody can break. It's a covenant, and it's a huge, huge difference. T? Another thing, let me say this. My parents, my in-laws, I'm watching on TV. It seems like everybody has a perfect marriage. The whole idea, we hear this sometimes, not as much as we used to. Having children will bring us closer together.
Yes.
We hear that sometimes. And I'm telling you guys, boy, we could do a whole day on that. The thing, talk about the differences. Tell me if you think this is not a true statement. When it comes to children, sometimes, ladies, y'all don't be thinking right. I'm just...
There are some men, too, but go ahead.
Yeah, possibly, but I'm just some strange... Okay, here's a great example. I don't want... This is a true story. I'm tempted to hesitate to use our child's name, but it was Elizabeth. So, Elizabeth, has traveled all over the world. She studied a semester in Spain. She likes to travel. She's fluent in Spanish. She's learning Portuguese and French. She likes to travel. She wants to practice international law. She's been accepted to the Geneva School of Diplomacy to get a master's in international relations and then come back to the States. And anyway, so she wanted to go to Costa Rica a few weeks ago. Okay, so now my thinking is this. You said you were home staying with us when you should be out of here. I didn't say that part. But because, she's finished college, she's back at home. I ain't trying to have the kids move back. Okay. Anyway, so she said, I want to go to Costa Rica. So I'm like, shouldn't you be saving your money to go to Switzerland? That's what you said. No, Dad, I really want to go. Okay. So, hey, if you want to go, but now I'm going to sign off on this to be your co-contributor. So she calls from Costa Rica. I'm out of money. I would tell you like Jeremy said, I told him, maybe she should get a part-time job. That's my answer. Teresa panicked.
I didn't panic.
Frowning.
I did not panic.
I can see how you look.
I didn't panic.
But Teresa's like, what's she going to do? We got to send her money because you decided to go to Costa Rica on vacation? And see how this could cause strife? You see what I'm saying? I'm telling you, kids are manipulative. That's a whole different session, though. They're selfish.
Yeah, you keep saying that.
They're all the things that we hopefully are not going to be. or growing out of. But anyway, so having children, the bottom line, is not going to probably bring your marriage closer together. So we're talking about great or unmet expectations and marriage fairy tales. As we wrap that part up, questions, comments, things that we didn't cover?
Well, I was just thinking, I hear this a lot. Getting married will make me happy. It's like you are marrying, saying, okay, it's going to make me happy. It's going to make me happy, individually here. And when I hear that, I'm thinking, marriage it can be, but it can't just make you happy. I need you to be happy within yourself before you get married. Do you see what I'm saying? Just marrying, thinking this person's going to make you happy is really something you have to deal with prior to that. And if you're expecting the husband to make you happy and he's not doing those things, then you are going to be unhappy, because I need you to be happy within yourself first, then marry. And don't be, you can really run a man away, so to speak. I'm not running away literally, but you know what I'm saying. You push him away a little bit if you're overly needy, so to speak, because really God wants that part of you. And the reason I can say this is from my experience. When I got married, I did expect Jimmy to make me happy, and it wasn't there. He wasn't making me happy in the way I need it. And one day, at home by myself, the Lord said to me, and I truly believe this, that He said, He's going to only do a certain part of that. The rest is me and you. I'm going to do the rest of that. And so my relationship with Him is what changed that. It gave me, I understood more of who He was or is, and it helped me understand how He saw me, which gave me that happiness that I needed.
Well, and even more than that, it gave you a sense of joy that's not dependent upon your circumstances.
True.
So even when things aren't going well, now I've got this joy inside me. It's not about circumstantial happiness or the lack thereof.